who's going to do our first session, which is on engaging children. Yeah, engaging children for a brighter future. Over to you, Didi.
Thank you so much. I want to start out with a story. I was in the Hestia kindergarten in Holland, and out in a playground, there was a young boy. He had recently come to Holland with some expat parents. He was African American, a very cute child, had a couple of brothers and sisters also in the kindergarten, and he was playing in the mud kitchen, making mud soup, mud pies, and offering me that. Uh, he just spontaneously came up to me and told me that he wants to be in the future, he's going to save the earth because people aren't taking care of the earth. And I was quite surprised. It was a very clear and like strong expression. He was very, very decided about it. And not only that, he continued to tell me that, he's going to buy a bio truck. He was going to buy a electric, uh, what's a Tesla, and he already had his whole business plan worked out. He had this plan to sell lemonade, so he had his little lemonade stand, and he had his goal of how much money he needed to buy his biodiesel or electric Tesla truck. And I was really interested to know how he came to this particular vision. And he said that in his school, his teacher had told him that people are not taking care of the earth, and he's going to be an earth protector. He's going to save the planet. So, you never can underestimate how seriously sometimes children take our messages, our words, and working with children is an opportunity to create that type of deep passion in a small child, for the environment, for sustainability, for a better world, for helping others. All of these things, these types of attitudes can be shaped already from childhood. Many of you may not be teachers, and that's okay. You might have contact with children as parents or as aunts or uncles or as mentors or friends or in non-formal situations. But usually life will put a lot of us in contact with children. And if you have a passion, that's one of the most contagious things. Children tend to be very influenced by the adults that they love. So if you have a good relationship with a child, whether you're the teacher or you have some other type of relationship, they really look up to the people that they love. And when you're passionate, when you're one of those people that a child thinks is special in their life, and you're passionate about something, you love something, then that child it's often contagious for them. They often will pick up on your passion. And now that could be a positive thing or a negative thing. But if you're passionate about the environment, about sustainability, all of these themes, this is an opportunity also to share that passion with children in ways they can understand. And this is where you have to meet the child where they're at, not speak to them in adult speak, but find ways that communicate to them that can be through stories. Actually, when I say stories, I don't just mean that you have to research like fairy tales and stuff that are appropriate, because sometimes it can be difficult to find exactly the type of story that has the message you want. But you can also use stories from your own life, because when you have that special relationship with a child, they're very curious to know more about you. And when you're open enough to tell something about when I was a child, if you remember as you were growing up, for sure you had people in your life, maybe grandparents, maybe parents, or other adults in your life. But it was always really interesting to hear what life was like for them as a child, their experiences, and not only as a child, also as an adult. And this sharing of experience tends to help not only, it helps also to create more emotional competency in children when they hear people talk about not only experiences but feelings, how it made them feel. That's what adds in the extra dimension that starts to build up children's you can say emotional literacy and being able, emotional intelligence, to be able to understand emotion in themselves and in other people by hearing that inner narration, that description of somebody telling what was going on for them, and this in an authentic experience. So I find that this simple tool, you could say, of sharing your life experiences, thinking how to make them appropriate, and here this really depends on the age that you're working with, but because I can give an example of how I would tell a personal experience story. But it's, usually if they're older, it can be a bit more natural, like you're talking to friends, no? But if they're young, then you break it down more into really simple sentences, descriptive, using nice descriptive words, using a storytelling voice, using repetition, building a bit of suspense. But you're just telling your own story. So you don't have to memorize anything complicated because you already know it, you lived through it. So this is one way I feel that can really influence children and engage them creatively and in having passion for something that you have a passion for. Children have their own minds. They're not just going to copy paste our passions, but I think there's something powerful, whether or not they are going to have the same interest. It shows them what it's like for somebody to have something that they're passionate about, because not everybody's passionate about things. Some people are just going through life in a more routine way, and so it's exciting for children when they meet somebody that has a bit of, interest and enthusiasm for something. I've seen, and I'll give you just an example. I have one teacher in the kindergarten, Sorina, and it's just so fun to go to a museum with her. Whenever you go to a museum, she's not, some people just like, looking at things like this. Sorina's like, wow, how beautiful that is. Wow, look at that. And this type of enthusiasm makes all the children go like, wow, what is that? And that's just her, and she's not making it up. She's not acting. She truly is quite enthusiastic when she goes into these situations. So, finding your authenticity, but also finding a bit your own child, being in touch with your enthusiasm, not being afraid to show it, also is part of that equation. Because if you think you're enthusiastic about something, but just talk about it like this to a child, it's pretty boring. So, when they actually visibly see that emotion and they can engage with it, it's really powerful for them. Rakesh, tell me, should I open up a bit for some questions and interaction? I can always keep talking, but let me hear if anybody has a specific question that I can reply to.
Yeah, definitely open it up to questions if anyone's got anything.
If not, I'll just continue with an example of sharing a personal experience, but in the form of a story. And I was giving this as an example also to my teachers when I was explaining to them about how to use personal stories as storytelling, because we were talking about doing the our Earth Day annual event, and they were a little bit, looking for new, fresh ideas. And I said, why don't you use personal stories? Oh, I don't have any personal stories. And I was like, well, yes, you do. Yes, you do. We all do. We all have tons of experiences. So we've lived so many years. We're full of experiences. We just have to appreciate and value them. So I said, think of a time when you connected with an animal in a special way. An animal, a bird, a plant. And then I gave this example, and then from that, a whole stream of creativity started to erupt from them. And by the end of the week, like had not only just come up with one or two, but they were giving like 3 per day to the children because the children were so fascinated. And as you start telling stuff, more come to mind. So this is a very simple story. And I have to put myself now into imagining that you're children. So I would be telling this story, let's say, to children that are 7, somewhere around there, 6, 7, not super little, but also not yet preteens. So one day I was going to work, and I was working in a big city. The city was Chicago, and I was going up from the metro, and as I rose up to the surface and started walking along the sidewalk, among the sea of legs, all of these people moving, I saw there on the ground a little tiny bird. And I was so surprised because the bird wasn't reacting and there were so many legs moving past and feet, and I was worried the bird was going to get crushed. And so I bent down and I tried to pick it up. And to my surprise, it let me pick it up. Now, this was the first time I'd ever held a bird, especially a wild bird. And as I scooped it up in my hands, this bird, I could feel its heart beating really fast. And I understood something must be wrong, that it's not flying away. Something has happened to it. It must be sick, or maybe it's hurt. And I thought, what to do? How can I help it? Because I didn't want to just put it back down again. And there was no safe place. I could see this was a sidewalk with really tall skyscrapers on either side. And at the same time, I was late for work. I had to get to work. What can I do with this bird? Then I remembered I had a friend who worked at a church and he loved birds, and I was sure he would know how to help the bird. And so I first went to work, and I went up the elevator all the time with this little bird in my hand, and he's just shaking a little bit but looking at me, and I felt I have this job to protect him. And so I went up the elevator into my work, and I showed them the bird, and I said, I have to take care of this bird, it's hurt. I don't know what they thought, but I left and I went to the church. Brother Clarence wasn't there yet, so I sat down and I started looking at this bird, and I started to think, maybe I'll sing to it. And so I began singing a song with a mantra that I like that means love is everywhere, and I started singing, Babanam Kevalam, Babanam, Babanam Kevalam, Baba. And then to my surprise, all of a sudden, the bird just flew from my hands. And he's now flying inside of the church. And I was like, no, this isn't a good place. So I called to him and I said, come back. I'll take you outside. And he came back into my hands. And then I walked outside and I let him go. And he flew into the sky. And I felt so good, like I had helped a little soul that day. Okay, so this was an actual experience. But as you see, I would probably tell that a lot differently if I was telling it to adults. So you might have noticed just the tone of voice changed, the pacing changed, using gestures a little bit, really, trying to really illustrate the whole story to make it more alive, more engaging for children. But these types of personal experiences about having a special connection, and then of course you can also invite the child. Have you ever held a bird? Have you ever had an experience with feeling connected to an animal? What was that like for you? And get them thinking, get them expressing. So this is a simple tool that you can try. Oh, are there some things in the chat? No, it was just technical things. Okay, and one that I think can be applied by teachers, non-teachers, anybody who's building up a nice relationship with a child. But what I'm interested in when I work with children isn't just indoctrinating them in something, but to awaken their love. Because if we want to have children that are passionate about caring for the environment, protecting the environment, you protect what you love. And often people forget that part of the equation, and they just start to try and, scare children in a way about how bad people are with the pollution and all of these things, and we must protect the earth. But they haven't stopped to first create that really rich, meaningful, sensorial relationship with nature. So I feel that those experiences of going out into forests, to lakes, to oceans, with children, and encouraging them, especially if they're small, just open-ended play, or just going camping even with teenagers, but spending those moments in nature together, allowing that spaciousness of nature, the contact with elements. It's extremely grounding and very important part of childhood. And many children are living their lives more and more in front of screens. Not only children, I have to admit, I'm also have been in front of a screen all day. So, taking time for those moments of connecting and engaging with the forces of nature is absolutely essential. Otherwise, we can't expect children to. It's not fair. It's not fair to ask them to protect something that we are ruining. So I think, focusing on how you can create these positive experiences, and at the same time, then also you can bring in the protection element and even permaculture principles. I have to, Rakesh, you can share the screen with our permaculture books and our Children in Permaculture project. So the last thing I'll leave you with is that I was one of the co-authors in a project that Rakesh initiated called Children in Permaculture. He helped to get it off the ground with his wonderful sociocracy skills of creating a really, really vibrant collaboration. And out of that resulted a book which has a lot of practical advice and ideas and inspirations for working with children and awakening that love of nature, awakening the awareness of permaculture principles already from a young age. So I encourage you to use that resource. Okay, so somebody just said, can you give some examples of how you used being out in nature, practical things in nature?
Okay,
I mean,
so can I just quickly say that, yeah, this is a copy of the book,
okay.
so Children in Permaculture. You can find it on childreninpermaculture.com. And also you have 10 minutes left, Didi. So you're
Oh,
going,
I thought I was
yeah,
already. Okay,
no,
I was
you've got 10 minutes, so plenty of time. So I think Sophie has
fine.
her hand up and maybe there's some things in the chat as well.
Yeah, I see something in the chat. Okay, shall I do the chat thing first? So she said, yes, stories are powerful. Can you give some examples of how you used being out in nature, practical things in nature? Something that, there's so many. I mean, most of these things are not planned for me. They're very spontaneous. Like I was out looking at, in the fall, at some flowers with the children from my children's home in Panatau. I'm here in Romania. I didn't introduce myself. I'm here in Romania. I'm running an NGO and we work in child protection and early childhood education. So I have a kindergarten where I'm sitting at right now. We also have a children's home and an after school center in the rural area. But I was just looking at some dried flowers, like flowers that had already finished blooming. And as I was exploring them, I said, oh, look, there's seeds. We can collect the seeds and plant them for next year. And so the kids became so fascinated with just, we got out the magnifying glasses to look at them. I showed them how to open up I think they were just cosmos flowers, but we were opening up the seed pod and taking out the seeds. And this whole activity ended up going on and on because they got so fascinated and they started picking up seeds everywhere. Another example was one of them got hurt. I forget I think they they got stung by nettles and they were crying. And I'm like, oh, do you know that where there's nettles, there's also a special plant that helps you to feel better after nettles, that Mother Nature always really knows what she's doing and she puts medicine near to the problem. And so we looked for plantain and we went and I showed them how to identify it. I showed them how to, make it kind of like squeeze it up into a kind of juice and then rub it on his skin. And the whole process for him was just, not only for him, all the kids got really interested. They were searching the entire, lawn for plantain and got into it for a while. We also just took them to a waterfall. No toys, no nothing, just spent the afternoon. You don't have to give them any instructions. These were kids that were at that time, they were between 4 to 7. And just allowing them to play in the water and pick up stones and throw them into the water and practice. I mean, sometimes you just give them an idea like, oh, look, let's see what floats. And we were just taking different leaves and watching how they floated down the eddying currents from the waterfall. So just being there, just spending that whole afternoon by the waterfall and floating leaves down the river and picking up stones. And I think we did some little bit of wood carving as well. Nothing spectacular, but just lots and lots of sensorial contact with nature all afternoon. And it was really good. Okay. I volunteer at the forest school near Wellington. I find the fire making, conservation, and land and arts craft skills are a great way to get on their level because they direct their focus. Agreed. Fire immediately creates a focus point and a natural social space. Wonderful. They are good ways of bringing everyone into the same space and creates an equal basis with out a adult-child hierarchy, all engaged in the same creative process. I think there's a lot of crossover between forest schools and permaculture. Absolutely. One of the people who was in our team is a forest kindergarten teacher. There were several people from the forest kindergarten movement participating in children in permaculture. So there's absolutely overlap. I'd say it's one method of place-based learning where a lot of the learning is coming from where you do the learning and being very spontaneous and open. I've observed some forest kindergarten in Australia, and I was very impressed with how observant the teacher was, how skilled she was in watching the children and understanding their needs and the learning opportunities and the growth that was happening. Yeah. So
Yeah, so can I just say that, yeah, the project, how the Children in Permaculture project started was because this lady who teaches forest school teachers was really passionate about, bringing permaculture to children. And so me and her got together when I was in Finland, and we sat and basically created the Children in Permaculture project because of that conversation. Then the next person we found was, as soon as I put the word out there that we wanted to do this project, everyone kept telling me about this one person who is a perfect fit. And that person also happens to be a permaculturist who also is into forest schools. And a few weeks ago, I also did the forest school training. So I did the level 3 forest school training course as well. So we're all really, yeah, Children in Permaculture project and the Forest Schools network is really very closely interlinked. In fact, in our conference that we had a few years ago, so the last live face-to-face conference we had I think at least half of the people who attended were all from forest schools, and our keynote speaker was John Cree, who's a really amazing forest school trainer. So I see
there's two
Sophie
hands
had
up.
a hand up,
Yeah.
and Ryan as well. So maybe if they can ask their questions. We have about 5 minutes left.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask, because you were talking about, first instilling a love of nature into children. And I think, in our community, we've kind of got that step. They're really, engaged and passionate about nature. And the thing I find difficult is kind of how, in a loving way, to explain to them why there are so many people who don't have that connection and why they see a lot of people damaging the environment, throwing rubbish, a lot of destruction. It's quite hard to find a way to explain that without kind of making a judgment on other people.
Yeah, wow. That's a good question. That is a really good question. The first thing that came to my mind was a healing story from Susan Perro, who has written several books on therapeutic storytelling. How old are these children?
They're around between like 5 and 7.
That's still a good age for therapeutic storytelling. So recently we collaborated on a collection called the Grief and Loss Collection, which included grief about environmental loss. And she has several stories there that I think are very relevant. So Susan, Perrow, Susan Perro, and her last collection of stories that I'm thinking of was The Stories to Light the Night. Mm-hmm. Okay, and it has a specific section that's on environmental, like grieving, also, or the loss of habitats, So there's a nice story about King Don't Care, but I don't have time to tell the whole story. I just turn you on to the resource. But I feel storytelling again can, the brilliance of metaphor and storytelling is that it captures a deeper level of our imagination. And so it's not judgmental. You can talk about even heavy traumas or different things through the medium of metaphor without triggering the trauma, because you're giving it a new framework, and metaphor can help us to reimagine something. So, I think it's really important to avoid powerless and victimized stands. We want to give children a sense of agency. And so when, if talking about something like ocean pollution, also talk about that project, like the Great Ocean Cleanup Project. A young person who saw all of the plastic in the ocean, and I'm forgetting his name right now, but he's very inspirational. It's a Dutch name, He's a Dutch young person who came up with this plan for the Great Ocean Cleanup. Look it up on Google, and basically creating a type of boom that captures the pollution and helps to it's very permaculture. It uses the forces of nature, uses the currents of the ocean and the winds.
So just say we've got 1 minute left, and I think Ryan has a question.
Okay, ask your question. Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for all that. That was amazing. Mine's not so much a question, but just seeing everyone else puts in effort of such inputs, I have something that kind of connects with it all. And I plan to teach more for TY in Ireland. It's a transition year. It's like maybe 15, 16-year-olds. But just over the last winter and dealing with my own mental health and lots of stuff. And that's the main issue with a lot of that age now, is they're so disconnected that and so untalked about is mental health in this country, in Ireland anyway, and I know from students of my family who are at that age group in school that it doesn't seem normal to have ups and downs, ebbs and flows. And I've used kind of like your story, or I plan to more when I'm teaching in schools, to talk about plant cycles and talk about flowers expressing themselves when nature intends them, when the environment is asking for it, and then for it to be okay, like a tree in winter when the environment's quite nasty and when they're not themselves, to like go within and be quiet and be a bit sad, maybe that's normal. And then the conditions once again are going to come and you can express yourself. I hope to like not be too straight with kids and like say, oh, you might feel down or whatever, but instead metaphorically explain how it's so normal for us all to have these times when we are like quiet and down and closed in and not ourselves at all, but yet trust in the fact that again we will express ourselves and the conditions will allow us to be ourselves and shine and flower.
Absolutely wonderful. So maybe Didi, if you'd just like to say last words just to wrap it up.
Oh, yeah, I think that you just touched on something lovely, which is that nature itself is the ultimate source of metaphor. And so that, something that Rakesh and I plan to do in the future is to co-write a book in which we will talk about the inner lives of plants and other things in nature. Because it's very memorable when kids can relate empathically to nature, not just as objectively, but seeing it as having its own consciousness, which it does have. So I think, yes, using metaphors from nature to understand the cycles of life is brilliant. And that's the type of thing that creates that deep and profound respect for nature and sense of awe, mystery. Love for nature is connected to that sense of how big and how amazing and how tiny and how small and intricate and all of that nature is. So I invite you also to, if you're not working with children, to make a relationship with a child, because it helps reawaken your own childlike eyes and see nature in a much fresher way when you're working with a relationship through a child, not just intellectually, but with a heart. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Wonderful. It's really amazing. Thank you so much, Didi, for coming and for sharing your gifts.
Okay, I'm going to leave because I have somebody waiting for me on a meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
By the way, I think Sophie's also going to be part of that book project, and I think Zoe also to do some of the artwork. So.
Wonderful. Nice to meet you. Oh, how exciting.
Yeah, it's so nice to meet you now, Didi. Now
I've heard about you. I've heard about you. Yay. Looking forward to
together.
Okay. Take care.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much.
You're welcome.
Beautiful. So just a moment to pause and reflect on, wow, children really are our future. I know that sounds like a cliche, but if we can really instill this love, this compassion in the younger generation and give them the tools that they need, they can start really changing this world. And it's already happening, let's face it. We can see some of these youngsters that are coming through, really strong, powerful young minds, full of curiosity, full of love, full of compassion, and they're already starting to do it. So yeah, it's a really beautiful process to see. So Yeah, let's just keep that story going. Wonderful. So we're going to transition over to the second talk, which is going to be about dragon dreaming. So I think Sophie and I will haven't totally planned anything, but between Sophie and I, we'll cover all the main concepts of dragon dreaming and how we can use it to really create really amazingly beautiful, creative, fun, community collaborative projects. So I guess the story really starts by us thinking about, well, what is the purpose of dragon dreaming? So any tool really is there to solve a problem. So a screwdriver is to, put in or take out screws. A hammer is to hammer things in, and so on and so forth. So every tool has a purpose and was invented for a reason. So what was the purpose for dragon dreaming? So where it really came from is the person who invented it, John Croft, was a community activist doing a lot of projects all over the world. And what he noticed is a lot of projects with really good people, with really great ideas, people with a lot of passion. For some reason, many of them would just fall apart and fail. And he was trying to understand why. So he started to research and analyze what is it about certain projects that makes them successful and what is it that makes them fail. And he came up with all sorts of conclusions. And he basically took these conclusions to see, right, how could we prevent that from happening? So for example, a really great idea, and great ideas come up all the time. I'm sure you all have them all the time as well. These great ideas come up, but many of them fail to actually materialize because that person couldn't do the project on their own, and they failed to really truly express it to other people, and therefore didn't get other people engaged and on board to be able to help them with the project. Another situation could be where perhaps the person shared the idea, but was really, really rigid in kind of sticking to their way of doing it. And other people who were kind of attracted to that kind of got involved, but maybe had slightly different ideas. And this person kind of started to control it and not really allow others to really have their say. And therefore, people started to get disillusioned and not be engaged and so on and so forth. And again, project falls over. And many, many, many similar things like this. So he started to look at, well, what is it that we could do? And also communication between people was often very tricky and very difficult. Different people with different ideas, different ways of seeing the world, different skill sets, approached solutions in different ways. So he looked at all of this to say, right, how is it that we could somehow minimize the possibility of those things causing our projects to fail? And he put together all kinds of different tools to actually start addressing that. So effectively, what dragon dreaming is, and I should point out he's from Australia, and he worked a lot with Aboriginals and in other parts of the world, peoples who indigenous people. So he really had access to a lot of indigenous wisdom, and he could see very, very clearly in this indigenous wisdom was really, or rather he could see the opposite way. Maybe it's easier to express it that way. He could see how this kind of westernized kind of thinking really was creating most of the problems that we have in the world. Whereas the indigenous way of seeing the world as just us being part of nature, just part of a cycle, was so much more enriching, so much more, yeah, just in tune with their surroundings. And so he was trying to, how could we, you know, take this really arrogant Western kind of culture that says, I know it all, we are great, we are superior, and these pagans, these, well, what do they know? These, you know, this kind of, how could you get this indigenous wisdom into these kind of really arrogant kind of, you know, culture? And so he started looking at different tools that he could start to use to start to really subtly bring this kind of awareness to cultures. So how to create projects that really are environmentally friendly, that really do take care of human beings, that take care of nature, that take care of, you know, human emotions, as well as, you know, meeting our other needs, and so on and so forth. And yeah, so he brings a lot of that ancient, yeah, kind of Aboriginal culture, but a lot of ancient wisdoms into these tools. And yeah, so that's the kind of basics of it. And I don't know, perhaps a question that I must admit I don't know the answer to. I've heard it a few times, but for some reason it doesn't stick in my head. Is, why is it called dragon dreaming? What's the dragon part of it? Maybe Sophie can tell us, and maybe this time it will stick.
So it was interesting actually for me coming across dragon dreaming, because part of my traveling was on a trail of dragons. So I already had quite a good idea of the mythology of dragons in Western culture. And as far as I understand it, the dreaming, like if you know anything about the Aboriginal culture, they have this very important focus on dream time. Not as we understand it, like when we're asleep and something that's not real, but the dream time is the real time. It's the time we connect with the ancestors, and it's the time that this kind of knowledge and truth comes into us. And each person has their own dreaming, which is their own piece of the truth. That is kind of their mission in life. So that kind of brings that kind of context of dreaming, not as something imaginary or something wishful, but as something very real. And then in terms of the dragon, has my sound gone funny?
No, we can hear you. Carry on.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and then in terms of the dragon side of it, in terms of Western culture, we've often used the mythology of dragon as everything that's kind of dark and unpleasant, and we've created this binary where the dragon is this kind of repulsive and evil creature, and you have the myth of St. George slaying the dragon. You have the dragon who steals the princess. So we've created this binary where we've got everything that is good, and then we've got the things that are bad, which are the dragon. And so one of the things that they're kind of, the idea of this is bringing, kind of taking out this binary thinking, which is something we've had a lot in the West. And this idea of all the things that we try to kind of repress. So the dragon is the kind of the repressed energy, the things that we try and put down, whether that be the things we don't believe in ourselves, the dreams that we thought maybe can't happen, the feelings that we have that other people don't support us or they don't know what they're doing. All these kind of things that we try and kind of compartmentalize is the idea of breaking down that binary and kind of taking again this holistic thinking. So the idea of dragon dreaming is you get to a point where you dance with your dragon. It's not a fight anymore where you're fighting kind of against the world and against reality. You get to a point where you're kind of dancing with your dragon, and so you break down that binary of all of these things is not so clear, the light and the dark and the bad and the good, but you can kind of see them in a whole, that all of these things exist and that they can work together. So in that way, you kind of have this idea of the dragon and the dreaming. You have this knowledge, and you have this kind of repressed things that can come into being. So instead of the dragon being something that has to be repressed, it's something that can be brought into the world in a kind of beautiful and transformed way.
Brilliant. Awesome. Wonderful. Thanks very much, Sophie. So In practical terms, maybe, I mean, we've only got what, a little less than 20 minutes left to kind of go through this. And so maybe we can introduce you to a few of the tools. So there's a whole, I think probably for me, the most fascinating part of Dragon Dreaming is how they understand the nature of the different mentalities of people and the nature of how the different phases of projects evolve. So the kind of, there's kind of four mentalities and four parts to a project, every single one of which is really essential. So the first part and the first mentality is the dreaming stage. So the actual, when people come together, why are we coming together? What is it that we want to do together? And so it always starts with one person at least having an idea. Oh my God, wouldn't it be great if we did a project to engage children in permaculture? Children in permaculture project. Wow, what a great idea. Who would be interested? And if I just kept that to myself, or rather if Gaia had kept that to herself, and hadn't kept saying, hey, yeah, but what about, how about doing a project for children? How about children in permaculture? Yeah. If she hadn't kept sharing that dream, I wouldn't have got fascinated by the idea and offered to help her, and therefore the project probably would not have gotten off the ground. So sharing the dream, first of all, and then finding people around you. And the way that you, the way that this works with dragon dreaming is that you, and the same with sociocracy, which we'll cover later on, is that instead of it just being one person's dream or two people's dream, it needs to be all of our dreams. So whoever we attract to the project, so the way that I work it is typically I'll make the first call and see, well, who's interested in that. They get attracted by that calling. And then we say, right, now I need to drop my ego. I need to drop my understanding of what this project is and what I imagine it will be. But I would express what I would like from the project. And I need to hear from you. What is it you would like? What is it you would like? What would you, what? And we ask a really beautiful generative question, you know, what needs to happen in the next 3 years to make you passionately want to be part of this project? So what needs to happen in this project in the next 3 years to make you so passionate, so like, wow, you're going to do what? Yeah, I want to be part of that project. Fantastic. Yeah, let me in, let me in. I want to be part. What makes you that excited? Once people express that, then we can create a common vision of what we want to do together. And in terms of mentalities, what you find is there's people who are very much dreamers. They have ideas. And what you find is quite often with many dreamers, not all, but many dreamers, is they don't necessarily have the skills to actually implement all of those ideas. They definitely don't have the time because they have so many ideas. They definitely don't have the time to implement all those. But if it wasn't for this, so some people may look at them, oh, you're just a talker. You just talk about doing things. You're just a dreamer. You're not a, and it's almost like they put them down. But imagine what a boring world this would be if it wasn't for these dreamers who dreamt about something, who dreamt about being able to do this, being able to do that, dreaming about the impossible and writing and expressing how about the impossible happening. And then somehow, in some way, because of that dream, someone else got interested in it, who is a person who could maybe manifest this, and they manifested these amazing ideas. So the dream is essential. The dreamers are essential. They're a really beautiful part of this equation. But we can't necessarily expect the dreamers to then fulfill and continue the project on. Though some definitely are. I am definitely a dreamer. But I'm also the next phase. I'm also a planner. I can also take this really crazy abstract idea and work out, well, what are the building blocks? In order for that to happen, first this needs to happen, and then I can do this. I could also do these three things at the same time. Then that leads to this. Then by the time that's finished, then I can do that. And then, and this is how I can break things down very easily and plan a project. So again, these planners are really an essential part of a successful project, working out how to take this crazy, mad, beautiful, abstract idea and see how could you turn that into reality. Maybe there's parts of it that are just not feasible. And so the planner is the person who can say, well, actually, that part is not doable yet. We don't have any technology. We don't have the capacity to do that. But what we could do, if that's what you want to achieve, we could do it like this. We could do it in a different way. And maybe, and so then all of us, and how the dreamer and the planner communicate with each other is really essential. So for example, if the dreamer is allowed to dream and then they hand that over to the planner then goes off and starts planning and writes the project plan, said, boom, here we go, here's the plan. And then the dreamer's like, nah, that was yesterday's dream. No. Now the dream is to do this. And the planner's like, oh, I just spent all day planning that. What do you mean? And so you can see they'll get disappointed. Okay, all right. So now I'll plan that one. Off you go. And then, no, that was last week's dream. Now the dream is, oh my God, again. And so this is what leads to clash, because people are speaking different languages. So we need to find a way. And what Dragon Dreaming is really good at doing is giving everyone the space to write, this is the dreaming time. Let's dream. Everybody, whoever wants to, anybody, whether you're a dreamer or not, let's dream, and let's dream together. And then we finish dreaming. All right, now let's hand it over to the planners. Planners, work it out. What can we, planners, right, now express that back to the dreamers to see how realistic is this, and knowing that this is not possible, but that could be possible. Now let's get the dreamers to, you can't do that. Oh, I tell you what, in that case, maybe we could do, I don't know. And boom, 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 off they go again, dreaming. The planner, right, okay, let's take that idea until, and you play this game, and until you find a plan that is now feasible. So the next phase, and I'll speed this up a little bit, the next phase is then the actual doers. And the doers are, again, really essential. No matter how good your plan is, if you don't have someone who can actually manufacture, make a project, make it happen, it's not going to happen. So the doer is equally important. And what you find is very often doers are not the most patient people. They're not the kind of people who often will want to sit in meetings talking about meetings and having meetings to discuss when the next meeting will be, so that they can make sure they have meetings to discuss what might possibly happen sometime possibly in the future. But the doers are long gone. They're out of your project. They're like, yeah, these guys just talk. I'm not interested. And so again, you need to find ways in which to creatively find a process that allows the doers and the dreamers and the planners all to work together. And because, yeah, I want to move on to kind of finish this story. There's a lot more I can obviously say, but probably the most essential part of all of this, all of them are essential, but the one part that very often is missing from many projects is the celebrator stroke. Yeah, I like to call them the celebrator, but there's other ways of kind of approaching this kind of mentality. But what they do is they make sure that you kind of at each phase of a project, look at what you have done, how that relates back to the original dream, and to continuously check that everything is going in a really beautiful, cohesive way. but more importantly, how well are people doing? So these are the people who take care of each other. So one part is kind of project management style, about looking at, how well the project is doing from the perspective of delivering against the dream. But more importantly, they're looking at the people. How joyful is this? How much love and compassion and joy are people getting? Is there anyone who is doing too much? Anyone who's burning out? Anyone who's getting stuck? So they're continuously in the project, getting feedback and encouraging everyone to, hey, slow down, take a step back. Let's just have a look at what we've just done there. Oh my God, look at what we have done. Isn't that amazing? You, Sophie, you did this. Donna, you did that. Alkis, oh my, wow, wasn't amazing. Samia, Andreas, Courtney, look at what we have achieved. Aren't we amazing? Ryan, oh my, wow, what a beautiful, making sure that everyone is celebrated, that everyone, whatever part somebody played in a project, that we recognize and really celebrate their part. So we've got, I think, about 5 minutes left, if I'm right. So maybe I'm going to invite Sophie in to see if there's anything she would like to add to kind of finish things off. There's lots and lots and lots of tools that we can then bring in to Dragon Dreaming. But I don't know, is there anything else you'd like to add in the last 5 minutes?
Maybe something very simple, which is a nice way in your own personal daily life you can get into Dragon Dreaming. And it's something I use with my partner, and when we have volunteers that we're hosting in small groups, is as it's a kind of fractal. So you have this structure that you've got the dreaming, planning, doing, celebrating. So these are the stages of the project that goes round, as Rakesh explained. They're also the people. And you can also look at that as your parts of the day. So you can do like a mini cycle. So you wake up, if you have a morning practice, or you can kind of put that in, rather than waking up and throwing yourself at the day confused. Take a minute and dream the day. So you think, what is my dream of the day? Where am I going? What do I want to achieve? And you dream the day. And then as you get up, you plan the day. How am I going to put that dream into fruition? How is that going to pan out in the day? Then the doing, you are doing that in the day. And then in the evening, as Rakesh said, in terms of the celebration, to not forget to celebrate that. So you reflect, okay, this was the, what we set out to do today. And rather than thinking about everything that wasn't finished, think about what was finished. What did we achieve? How is everyone? How do we feel? And kind of bring that cycle to a close every day, because there's often this feeling that we have so much to do, we're never going to finish it, there's never enough time, and everything kind of becomes like, okay, tomorrow. But it's a really nice way, just like in a project or in your life, to kind of like live that cycle in a day, in a small way, and you have that feeling of like completion. And it's really just, even though it's very simple, just at the end of the day, going round, especially like when we have volunteers and it's new practice for them, and everyone says what they did, because you didn't always see what the other people were doing, and everyone shares, and you realize between us we achieved so much, and like, how do we feel, where are we? And you can see really that you're working a lot and getting very close to your dream, just even in a day, if you kind of put it in bite-sized chunks. So that's like an invitation, a way you could start with this in a small step.
Beautiful. Yeah, and so that kind of fractal pattern is also, it's a microcosm of the overall project as well. So, so you dream the dream, you plan the dream, you do the dream, you celebrate the dream. Then you plan the plan, or you dream the plan, you plan the plan, you do the plan, you celebrate the plan. Yeah. Then you dream the doing, you plan the doing, you do the doing, and then you celebrate the doing, and so on and so forth. So it's really, they're fractals, they're cycles within cycles within cycles. And then there's all kinds of really beautiful tools that help you to, really make sure that every person from every perspective is engaged, and, like the project plan, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce the name of it. It's an Aboriginal word, something like the Carabaret. There's lots of D's and T's in there, which don't really make sense to me. But anyway, and then you have like song lines, which are just really beautiful. This idea of if anyone understands the concept of Aboriginal song lines, where through these songs they tell tales, and everyone has their song lines, and they interact and intercross between other people's song lines, and by continuously telling these song lines, you can really get a big picture of your surroundings and of your whole history and everything. And in using that as a kind of project planning tool, you can look at each deliverable, each element of your project as a part of a song line. And what needs to happen to make this particular song line happen? Well, first this needs to happen, then that can happen, then that can happen, and that interacts with another song line, and so on. So there's lots of really beautiful tools, and everyone can kind of say, well, where along that song, where can I contribute to that song line? For example, maybe one person may be, I'm a computer consultant. I can make websites in my sleep, but I really hate sitting in front of a computer now. I really do not want to make another website in my life. But someone else is like, wow, I'd really love to learn how to make a website. Oh, wouldn't it be great? So could you kind of put those two together to say, well, why don't you train this person to write a website? Then you never have to write a website again for us ever again, and so on and so forth. So where's people's passions? Where are their skills? What are they willing to offer? And through this kind of really creative project management tool, you can start seeing, well, who's going to do what, how are they going to do it, and how do you do it in a way that really enriches everyone's lives. And bang on time, I think that's where we're going to conclude the idea of Dragon Dream. Are there any kind of burning questions? We're actually going to take, I think, a 5-minute break. But if there's a burning question, maybe we can quickly answer that. But there's a lot of information out there about Dragon Dream. Alkis.
Quick question about resources. I can imagine there are like either books or information. Is there a favorite access point
I'll
for
put
you?
into the I'll send into the chat there's a PDF which is a really nice summary of Dragon Dream, and basically very often if we're going to teach it, we'll teach it as like a weekend long course, or a 5 or even a week long immersion kind of course where you really feel it and you really put it into practice, because it's it's one thing hearing it and seeing it in theory, but putting it into action is where it's really at. That's where you really embody it, and there's a lot of beautiful tools like the Pinakari and stuff to really help you to kind of get into your body and just feel how things are working and how things are going. So
Sounds really magical.
Lots of really magical stuff. Absolutely. Wonderful. So we're going to pause the recording, etc., and take a 5-minute break, and we'll be back at 1:15, where we'll be talking about sociocracy, about collaborative decision making. So stay tuned. See you then. Have fun.
The recording has stopped.